Today, we have a crazy revenge story about parents not loving their child. We'll get into that in a bit, but first, my abusive ex-stepfather made my mom die, and I can't wait to have my revenge. I'm a 34-year-old female. My mom was a 55-year-old female just before her death, and my now ex-stepfather is 65-year-old male. There are so many things he did I would never forget nor forgive, but the fact that my mom died because of his deliberate delay in making payments for her chemo treatment, I'd never forgive till the day I die. And yes, as I'm about to get into the story, you'll see that I got him back for it. But there are just some things you take with you to the grave. For anonymity, let's call my ex-stepfather N. A fairly short background story is he and my mom were married for 18 years. 18 whole years, and I never quite got used to having him around. I never liked him from the start, but after the messy divorce between my parents, my dad didn't want anything to do with my mom again, and that included me. So she got custody, and I haven't set my eyes on my dad since then. But that's probably a story for another day. N had very questionable behavior. I did catch him once trying to move to our neighbor's 20-year-old daughter, who came over one summer when she had a break, but as he and my daughter's relationship never really concerned me, I minded my business up till the day I went to college to better myself. When I became 27, however, I decided to further my education. My mom and N agreed and offered me and my small family the basement apartment of their home as I was already married and had a kid. A year and a half into my program, my mom was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. Just a week before her scheduled surgery to remove the tumors, one of the larger ones ruptured. This set off a chain of events that caused her cancer to spread. Later, she was re-diagnosed with a rare type of cancer affecting the connective tissue. After my mom's re-diagnosis, the doctors gave her an estimated 2 years to live without treatment. This is when N's abusive behavior began to escalate. He attended one of my mom's appointments where the doctors discussed her treatment options and had a full-blown tantrum. Note, I have my mom's medical records, and a doctor documented all of this, which becomes important later. During this outburst, N shouted that his wife wouldn't be doing crap, stormed out of the room, and left my mom humiliated and distraught. After N left, my mom confided in the doctor, telling them she feared for her life. She admitted that while she knew she needed treatments to survive, she also knew L would do anything in his power to prevent her from undergoing them. The doctor noted her fears in her medical records. N's behavior worsened from there. He became verbally, mentally, and physically abusive. He drained their joint bank account so my mom couldn't even afford basic necessities like bread. He sabotaged her car, including cutting the brake lines, and created obstacle after obstacle to prevent her from attending her treatments. On average, my mom needed treatments twice a week, but she was lucky if she made it to half of them, only because my spouse or I would step in to drive her. Eventually, my mom moved into the basement unit of my home for her safety. I began standing up for her and defending her against N. I warned him directly, telling him, "If you don't stop, I'll do everything in my power to make sure you're held responsible for her death." He laughed in my face and said, "You're just a woman. What can you do to me?" From that point on, his abuse extended to me. He took every opportunity to belittle and target me, making it clear that he intended to make life as difficult as possible for both my mom and me. Determined to protect my mom, I hired a lawyer for her and switched my program to focus on criminal law so I could learn how the system worked. I started building a case against N, gathering evidence for 8 months using security cameras I set up in home. N was fully aware of these cameras. I hid nothing. He knew he was being recorded in certain areas, but that didn't stop him. During this time, I had been pre-approved by the bank to buy his 50% share of the house. All he had to do was sign one piece of paper, and within 30 days, he would have received $250,000. But he refused, declaring, "I'm not giving you my house. I'll put your whole family on the street instead." This statement, along with much of his abusive behavior, was caught on camera. Eventually, my lawyer's office served N a summons to attend court. True to form, he refused, arrogantly claiming, "I know more than the lawyers," and insisting he wouldn't show up. Because of this, we won the case by default. The court granted my mom sole possession of the house, froze all of L's assets under supervision to prevent him from liquidating them, and issued a restraining order to keep him away from my mom and the house. Additionally, he was prohibited from leaving Canada. That same night, the police evicted N from the home, and the locks were changed. With him gone, my mom finally had the freedom and safety she desperately needed. We were able to get her on to ODSP, Ontario Disability Support Program, which gave her access to reliable transportation services for her treatments, as well as support from cancer societies. My mom and her lawyer also severed the joint tenancy of the house, converting it to tenants in common. For context, in Canada, homes can be co-owned as joint tenants or tenants in common. Joint tenancy, typically for married couples, splits ownership 50-50, and if one person dies, their share automatically goes to the other. Tenants in common allows each person to own a distinct share of the property, which can be passed down according to their will. This distinction would prove crucial later. While my mom was still lucid, she worked with her lawyer to ensure that everything, her share of the house and all her assets, would go to me if she passed away. This legal preparation gave her peace of mind and ensured N could never interfere again. In the 2 years leading up to my mom's passing, we continued to battle N in court. He refused to cooperate, declined every offer, and outright refused to sign divorce papers. As my mom's health deteriorated, I became her full-time caregiver, managing every aspect of her care and well-being. Near the end, during a court settlement meeting, N told both my lawyer and the judge, "I'm not signing or dealing with anything else. I won't attend any more meetings. I'll wait for her to die and take everything." The judge and lawyers immediately shut him down, making it clear that this would never happen. He simply laughed, and that was the last anyone heard from him. Earlier this year, my mom tragically passed away, not directly from cancer, but from a complication. A tumor ruptured, causing an upper gastrointestinal bleed. She died in my arms. There was nothing I could do for her at that moment, and the trauma of losing her so suddenly left me diagnosed with PTSD. Despite the overwhelming grief and stress, I somehow managed to handle everything that followed. After her passing, N disappeared, changing all his contact information and failing to notify the courts of his whereabouts. My mom's lawyer and I moved forward with her through the probate court system. Since she had been granted sole possession of the house and her will explicitly stated her wishes, everything was legally transferred to me. The videos, evidence, and legal preparations my mom and I had put in place before her passing ensured a smooth transition. I had to sign some paperwork in court to finalize the transfer, but everything was handled properly and according to the law. Additionally, I submitted all of my mom's medical records, including the original doctor's note documenting N's outburst and my mom's fears. While my lawyer and the judge agreed that N's actions contributed to my mom's death, they concluded that there weren't enough legal grounds to hold him criminally responsible. Even so, I'm still pursuing justice. My lawyer and I are working to push the case forward, trying to hold N criminally accountable for his actions. It's an uphill battle, and my lawyer estimates a 60-40 chance of success, but we're doing everything we can with the evidence and his past confessions. It's a long shot, but I'm not giving up. After my mom's passing, all her assets, including the house and everything she owned, were officially transferred to me. I became the sole registered owner of the house and was granted her life insurance. Every penny of that insurance went toward paying off her debts, including the joint line of credit, credit card balances, and other outstanding liabilities. Essentially, everything N thought he would gain by waiting for her to die was awarded to me and approved by the judge. Despite N's behavior, I agreed with the courts to honor the original 50% buyout agreement we had discussed when the legal battle began. However, any debt he owes me, including his share of the joint mortgage, joint line of credit, and costs related to my renovations, is being deducted from the buyout balance. I also made it clear that the house will not be reappraised because I'm personally funding necessary renovations to restore it. At this point, N owes me over $50,000 in debt, and that amount continues to climb with every renovation I complete. My lawyer is also pursuing additional claims for 50% of my legal fees and compensation for the impact of my PTSD diagnosis, which has been a direct result of the events surrounding N's abuse and my mom's death. The challenge now is locating N. as he still technically holds 50% equity in the house. In Canada, there's a 2-year statutory limit for keeping claims open in court. Since no one has been able to contact N, his original claim to regain possession of the house was dismissed by the court as abandoned claim and title. I showed up for the court hearing. He did not. Recently, a friend discovered that N fled to Mexico, violating the court order that prohibited him from leaving Canada while these legal matters remained unresolved. This is an entirely separate legal issue, and my lawyer is handling it, as it falls outside my direct involvement. For now, the courts are not prioritizing this aspect, but it's another layer to the story. Ultimately, while the process has been grueling, the system has upheld my rights and my mom's wishes. I now have full physical possession of the house and control over her legacy, ensuring N's manipulative schemes failed entirely. Here's a refined version of your latest update with organized details and a clear tone. If N doesn't return to Canada and, hypothetically, passes away in Mexico, my lawyer and the judge have advised me that we can petition the court to claim his estate. This would allow the 50% equity he still technically holds to be transferred to me as collateral for the debt he owes. In the meantime, I still own the house outright, have sole physical possession, and, in all legal aspects, the house is mine. If N does return, he will face legal repercussions for violating the court order by leaving Canada. Should he attempt to reopen his original claim to regain possession of the house, my lawyer has assured me that he cannot. The courts dismissed his previous claim as abandoned, and he's barred from filing a new one. He would be left with only 2 choices: to either accept the original buyout offer, minus the debts he owes me, or refuse the offer, allowing me to proceed with petitioning the court to claim his estate and equity. Either way, N will never regain possession of the home. I'm pursuing legal action to hold him responsible for his actions. My lawyer and the courts are firmly on my side, recognizing the undeniable link between his abusive behavior, the delay in my mom's treatments, and her eventual passing. The legal system has supported me every step of the way, awarding me the house, her assets, and everything else he thought he could manipulate into his possession. In the end, his actions not only destroyed his relationship with my mom and me, but also ensured he lost everything he was so desperate to control. Also, hi, my name is Brendan, and if you guys enjoy these Nuclear Revenge videos, it would be awesome if you left a like or left a review if you're listening to our podcast. That said, our next story is The Jerk Recruiter. I've been job hunting for months, sending out resume after resume. Everybody around me knew that I was looking for a job. I told my friends to keep me updated about openings in their companies that fit my role. I was that desperate. Eventually, a friend of mine reached out to me and said that there was an opening in her company. Immediately, I tailored my CV to their recruitment notice. She was nice enough to tell me that the company was reputable, the position was challenging, and the chance for growth was promising. On the good side, I was sure that landing this job would have been the breakthrough I had been searching for since my former company declared bankruptcy. After weeks of waiting and a couple of initial screenings, I finally received an invitation for an in-person interview with the recruiter, Jeffrey. When I arrived at the office, I made sure I was prepared. My resume was polished, and my experiences and achievements were carefully highlighted. I'd researched the company, anticipated the questions he might ask, and even rehearsed my answers. The position felt like the perfect next step for me, and I was excited to talk about how my experience aligned with the role. I made sure I did not take it with the same levity I took the others, so I was a bit certain that the entire interview would proceed perfectly well. Jeffrey's assistant ushered me into his office. The space was pristine, with awards and motivational quotes carefully displayed on the walls. It was the type of place that felt like you should be honored to enter, and I was until I actually met Jeffrey. As soon as Jeffrey looked up from his computer, I could tell something was off. "Go on," he said, barely glancing at my resume before tossing it aside like it was yesterday's news. I started explaining my background, mentioning specific skills I knew matched what they needed, but he cut me off before I could even get halfway through my first point. Each time I tried to steer the conversation back to my accomplishments, he interrupted as if he'd already decided I wasn't worth his time. Yet I pushed through, mentioning my work on high-profile projects and my knack for problem-solving, but he barely seemed to hear me. You could understand that with the desperation that I applied and came for the interview, I was ready to say and do anything within the corporate world to get him interested in anything I had to say. Instead, his eyes skimmed over the papers on his desk, his phone, and anything but my resume. The more I talked, the clearer it became that this was a waste of time, for him at least. He moved on to other questions, his tone dripping with boredom, as though I was just another name on his list. When I walked out of that office, I couldn't shake the frustration that quickly took over my entire being. I was pissed because that was not the right way of dealing with intending employees. For one, I was confident in the work and experience I had to offer. If, by his ridiculous standards, he believed I was not, there were better ways to speak to candidates. Or I should not have been invited to begin with. The whole interview felt like one long insult. It felt like he was trying to tell me that I wasn't good enough to be taken seriously. I replayed the conversation in my head, going over the ways he'd barely listened, cut me off, and tossed out snide remarks about high standards and elite qualities. Jeffrey was more interested in hearing himself talk than actually considering whether I'd be a good fit. I was done thinking about the whole thing, so I decided to reach out to the friend who gave me details about the opening at her company, and I can't say I was shocked about what she said. Apparently, Jeffrey had a reputation for treating candidates like they were wasting his time, especially anyone who didn't align with his impossible checklist. He was known for being obsessed with the perfect candidate and making sure everyone around him knew it. Unfortunately, he was supposed to be out of town during the period of recruitment this time, but he stubbornly stayed back at the last minute. The more I learned, the more ridiculous it all seemed because all I heard made it feel more and more like he was overlooking qualified people to feed his own ego. By the end of the conversation, I concluded in my head that his arrogance and bias were totally unpleasant and unjust. If the entire company, even those you end up recruiting, feels there's something fundamentally wrong with how you approach and speak to people during the recruitment process, it has to end. Jeffrey needed a serious wake-up call, and if everyone at the company was too timid to give it to him because of fear of backlash, I was willing to go out of my way to bring him to his knees. I mean, he had already rejected me. I did not need a confirmation email to know that I won't be getting the job, so there was nothing to lose, really. The good part? I was still without a job, so I had all the time in the world to put my act in play. And that was exactly what I did, without thinking twice. As I sat down at my computer, I began constructing my dream candidate. Jeffrey's attitude had made it clear what he valued, the perfect blend of skills, credentials, and experience that only someone unrealistically perfect could have. And so, Dean Walker was born. I pictured Dean as someone Jeffrey would fall all over himself to meet. He had to be a blend of top-tier experience, exclusive certifications, and technical skills that would check every box on Jeffrey's inflated list. Dean had attended the right schools, aced all the right courses, and mastered every cutting-edge tool in the industry. I crafted his resume with care, stacking it with prestigious positions, highly specialized skills, and just the right balance of team leadership and technical ability. Every detail was carefully selected to appeal to Jeffrey's ego, and I made sure Dean's online profile reflected that same attention to perfection, portraying him as ambitious yet approachable. From the way I perceived Jeffrey, something told me that even if the resume seemed far-fetched to every normal person, in anything, he would feel some pride that someone with such a robust record applied. In an awesome, twisted way, I knew it would make him think his outrageous standard was not so outrageous. Once Dean's profile was live, I sent his resume and a short, professional cover letter directly to Jeffrey's email. I knew that seeing a candidate like Dean wouldn't just pique his interest, it would hit him right where he thought he was untouchable. This was a candidate no recruiter could afford to ignore, especially not someone with standards as high as Jeffrey's. Now, all I had to do was sit back and watch as he took the bait. Like I said, I knew he would be intrigued the moment Dean's perfect credentials flashed across his screen. It didn't take long, only a few hours after posting. Jeffrey reached out with enthusiasm, sounding far more interested than he ever had during my own interview. Pretending to be Dean, I responded politely, letting my words show just enough interest to keep him on the line without seeming too eager. I could practically sense Jeffrey's excitement as he imagined this ideal candidate fitting effortlessly into his dream role. Jeffrey replied immediately. He went on about how he's on a brief vacation at the moment and how he would not want his resume to sit waiting until he comes back to work. He ended up proposing a call to discuss career goals and how the company could support Dean's ambitions. And I was like, okay. The irony wasn't lost on me. I mean, here he was, pulling out all the stops for a fictional character that I created from the walls of my apartment. Yes, this was someone who ticked all of the ridiculous checklists, but he did not exist. While he dismissed me so easily, the one person who would have been desperate to overlook his condescending remarks and everything else that came with being in his presence. I was desperate enough to even collect an entry-level hourly salary. But I guess, like they say in the movies, the heart wants what the heart wants. Just that this time, the heart fell for the wrong person. My heart fell for a character from my imagination. Our brief exchanges only heightened his eagerness. I gave him enough details to keep him interested, but left room for more questions, ensuring he'd want to hear Dean's story in full. Now, Jeffrey was fully hooked, picturing Dean as the answer to his recruiting prayers. Little did he know that all the time, energy, and excitement he was investing were headed nowhere. This initial back and forth was just the beginning. Now I had him precisely where I wanted. Once Jeffrey was hooked on Dean, I decided to add a layer of difficulty, making Dean feel like a rare catch slipping through his fingers. Playing up the busy professional angle, I hinted that Dean was juggling multiple job offers and a tight schedule, suggesting that Jeffrey's company would have to make an exceptional case to win him over. Each time Jeffrey proposed an interview slot, I made sure to throw in a polite, "Unfortunately, I'm booked then. Perhaps another time?" It wasn't long before Jeffrey was bending over backwards, adjusting schedules, and even postponing meetings with other candidates to prioritize Dean. Jeffrey's obsession only deepened when, after a few small delays and last-minute rescheduling from Dean, he finally landed a preliminary interview. I kept Dean's responses impressive but concise, revealing just enough expertise to leave Jeffrey in awe. Whenever he called, I had a male friend pretend to be Dean. By the end of each call, he was convinced Dean was just what the company needed, but it was more about his ego. He wanted to be the one who brought Dean on board, and that was his mistake, because if he had let someone else handle it, someone not as invested as he was, they would have seen through the smoke almost immediately. When Jeffrey arranged Dean's final interview, he went all out. He booked the most luxurious conference room. From my friend at the company, I heard that Jeffrey finally got his dream candidate, and maybe he was not as wrong as we thought. Did I bother to correct her? Of course not. I could not count on her not slipping up and informing someone unintentionally. I heard that most senior executives were intimated about the interview because of the drama that Jeffrey had gone all out to act. So they were to come, witness the interview, and unanimously judge that Dean was the one for them. I confirmed to Jeffrey that Dean would stall all of his line schedules to attend the physical meeting because he felt he could be a good inclusion with Jeffrey's company. Much better than at the other companies he was in talks with. More lies. The days leading to the interview were the most hilarious throughout the entire encounter. First, I had my friend give him a reassuring call about his availability, but that was the last time they would talk. Why? The number became unreachable after that. On the day of the interview, I opened the mail to check how frequently he would send Dean an email when he did not show up. In one of the emails he sent, he asked if Dean wanted to reschedule. The whole thing was just a hilarious mess. After about 2 weeks, I asked my friend working in the company how the interview had ended. She burst out laughing, saying that Jeffrey's star recruit was a no-show, and he was relieved of the duty of recruiting new talents because the company felt he wasted too much time and company resources for a talent that was a no-show. Damn, satisfying. Our next story is, my mother didn't love her child. When I was about 10 years old, I used to think that mothers do not love their children. I thought they couldn't show the love they have towards their children if they had any. My mother was the reason I felt that way. I used to think that my mother's love was simply quiet, tucked somewhere beneath her heart, so deeply tucked that it never touched me. How sad. Because of how I felt, I struggled so hard to get her attention. I thought that if I could just get her attention, I might find the love buried there, waiting to be discovered. But childhood doesn't wait, and so I grew up reaching for something I couldn't see. As I grew up, I soon discovered why my mother was resentful and spiteful towards me. It was because she felt my father wasn't fair to her. History had it that my mother was caught up in a fantasy she built around the man who fathered me. A love story that strongly existed in her mind for so many years. My mother is a strong woman. She wants what she wants, even if she has to get to the end of the earth to get it. So she put so much energy into loving my father. She thought that if she loved him hard enough, she could turn his heart and also shape him into someone who could belong to her forever. I can't count how many nights I lay awake as a child listening to her pacing the floor, wondering what was wrong with her and what she hadn't done right to make him stay. Sometimes I heard her on the phone with her best friend, saying things like, "He'll come around, he has to." As much as I wanted my father to look at my mother, even if it was just for some moments, he didn't. My father didn't because he was already somewhere else, in his heart and mind, with her friend, and she was too blind to see it. Her obsession with him made her reckless and desperate. She made decisions that could affect another person deeply when she decided to have a child with someone who never loved her the way she wanted. For a long time, I couldn't stop wondering why she felt having a child for someone who didn't want her would suddenly turn everything around for her. She thought that maybe if she had a child, he would choose her. How convenient. She had me despite all the red flags. She thought my birth would be the beginning of a family, but instead it became the end of her dream. My father left for good, and that was the beginning of how she looked at me as if I were the physical embodiment of her failure. A permanent reminder that her love hadn't been enough. She grew quiet and withdrawn. A single mother in name, but barely a mother in spirit. I couldn't put a number on the times I'd caught her watching me, sometimes with a kind of bitterness. I could never understand why she was holding me responsible for a betrayal I hadn't committed. She didn't shout, she didn't argue, she simply withheld herself from me. With time, it became obvious that she felt nothing for me. The emptiness was so deep it almost had a weight. It was worse because I was meant to be means to an end, and that wasn't the end she had envisaged. My misery intensified when my mother finally settled for who was available in the person of Mr. T, my stepdad. I think at that point, my mother forgot that I existed. She behaved as though she needed to get back all the time she had spent loving my father. I saw that in the way she tried to redeem all the time she had waited for and wasted on my father. My mother is someone who loved love, and she loved hard every time she wanted to. And every time I saw her love hard, I was always pushed to ask her why I was the only one who didn't deserve to have a taste of her love. And to top it all off, I had never met my father. At some point, I yearned for my father. I felt meeting him would be a consolation for all the pain I had felt and all the bugging questions in my heart. When I asked my mother why I'd never met my father, she said, with her eyes cold, "Because he doesn't want you. He doesn't want either of us," she added. I felt the coldness in her voice so deeply, but it wasn't my fault that my father fell in love with her friend instead of her. According to the story that was peddled around, my mother had been friends with my father long before he met her friend, whom he fell head over heels in love with. It was a story of love at first sight for him. He was so smitten that he forgot that my mother had been pushing zealously for them to be a couple, even though he never promised my mother anything. In short, it was reiterated time and time again that he only loved her as a friend, but my mother would never take no for an answer. More so for the fact that they've been friends for a very long time. The situation became messier when she couldn't bring herself to accept that my father had fallen in love with the lady he introduced to him. My mother saw everything, but desperation and delusionality led her to get pregnant for my father. Then, when she told me my father didn't want us, I could see the resentment. Her words gave me something clear to hold on to, a reason for the decisions I made after that. I thought about how she carelessly said my father didn't want me, which was quite easy to understand, but my mother's distance, her gaze, heavy with blame, was something I could never understand. When I left home at 16, I knew I wasn't going to be missed, so I didn't look back either. It was a hard decision for me at the time because I got little or no support from my mother. I made a quick stop at my grandma's, my mother's mother. She loved me and she never hid it. At different times when my mother didn't know what to do with me, she would take me to her. In those times, I felt less of myself because I knew my mother couldn't hide how much she didn't want me. My grandma was a pillar of support to me when I needed it the most. I was able to go to college thanks to her support. When I left home, I knew I didn't plan on looking back, so I threw myself into my studies, and I remained undeterred even in the face of numerous challenges. I thought about my mother less and less as the years went by. I think she made it easy for me to do so because she never called, texted, or bothered about me. The only time she called me was on my birthdays. I found it very hard to believe that she treasured my birthday and not me. Years passed by quickly, and I painfully learned to fill the spaces within me with new people and priorities. After I graduated, I was determined to fly in my nursing profession, and I didn't relent until I rose in my career, defying every obstacle with a stubbornness that, ironically, I'd inherited from my mother. At 25, through sweat and hard work, I had built a life for myself. I was successful, respected, and even admired. I had friends who became family, mentors who believed in me, and a life that was filled with meaning. I had lots of older women who were willing and eager to fill the space of a mother in my life. My career was thriving, and for the first time, I felt whole. The wounds of my childhood had scarred over. The ache of my mother's indifference was almost a memory. Then, one Christmas, I got a knock in my apartment in New York. It was my mother. She showed up from nowhere. I hadn't seen her in nearly 9 years, and there she was, on my doorstep, her face softened with age, but her eyes as sharp as ever. She looked me up and down, and for a moment, I thought I saw a glimmer of pride and that tinge of stubbornness in her eyes, but I couldn't be sure. I stepped aside, letting her in, though every instinct told me to turn her away. We sat in silence for a while, our breath as loud as possible. Finally, she cleared her throat and said, "I'm proud of you. You've done well." Her words were cold comfort, but years too late. She was here because she wanted something. Acceptance, forgiveness, a second chance. I didn't know which, but she hadn't earned any of it. "You didn't care for years," I said, my voice steady, "and now you're here. Why?" She fumbled for words, her hands twisting in her lap. I wanted to see you, to know you're okay. I missed you, and I thought maybe we could start again." I didn't think she could miss me, or I felt it was not her place to use those words with me. To me, I was never her child. In short, I never existed in her world, but I managed to ask her why she could carelessly use those words. "You missed me?" I asked, incredulous. "All those years, you watched me grow up like I was nothing, and now you miss me?" I didn't owe her forgiveness. She'd never shown me anything close to love. She flinched, but I did not relent. I'd waited too long to say these things. "You made no effort, Mom, not once. And now that I've built something for myself, now that I've become someone, you think you can just walk back into my life?" Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't let them move me. I had cried for years, alone in my room, wondering why I wasn't enough for her. Now it was her turn. She told me how much it hurt her to watch my father love someone else after she had invested so many years of her life in their friendship. "I thought he loved me. I thought I could make him stay. And then, when he left, I couldn't look at you without remembering what I'd lost." Her honesty stung, but it didn't heal anything. It wasn't my fault that my father loved someone else, so why did I have to pay for his decisions? I knew I wanted her to feel half of what she made me feel growing up, and I was certain that there was no going back on my decisions. I made her believe that we were good because I allowed her to be nice to me. I even returned her calls sometimes, and I could see that she felt she could just walk into my life when she was ready to be a mother. Before she became interested in me, I had fixed my wedding, and I felt that was the perfect time for her to pay for her sins. What I did was allow my grandma to walk me down the aisle without the knowledge of my mother. I made my grandma see the reasons why I didn't want my mother around me. When my mother heard I had gotten married without her presence, she called me to ask if I hadn't let go of the past, and I could tell that she was hurt. I took a deep breath, steadying myself as I replied to her, "You have to live with the choices you made. I became who I am despite you, not because of you, and I intend to keep it this way." She sighed loudly before she ended the call. With that being said, that's all the time we have for today. If you enjoyed today's video, drop a like and comment below, and if you want to check out our other videos, click the video on the right. With that being said, I'll see you all next time.